There is a specific moment in human development that nobody talks about. The moment right before your best chapter begins. And if you're watching this, you're probably in it right now. Carl Jung called this the enantiodromia, the threshold where opposites meet. What he discovered was this: as the best chapters of human lives are always preceded by a death, not a literal one, a death of narrative, of identity, of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. Most people feel this moment and run. They think they're broken. They think the universe made a mistake and they slipped through the cracks. But Jung spent his career studying this exact threshold, and what he found changes everything about what's happening to you right now. There are 5 unmistakable signs that you're standing on the edge of your greatest expansion. Not the one you want, the one you were designed for. Today, we're walking through all 5 in order, so you know exactly where you stand. Let's begin with the first and most misunderstood sign. Before your best chapter arrives, your conviction shatters. For most of your life, you've operated from a place of certainty. You knew who you were. You had a plan. You understood the rules of the game. And even if you didn't like those rules, at least you understood them. Then something shifts. Suddenly, the things you were absolute certain about start feeling like lies. The career path that seemed so logical begins to feel like a prison cell. The relationship that looked like security begins to feel like stagnation. The identity you've been wearing, the reliable one, the successful one, the one people know you as, suddenly feels like a mask made of lead. This is where most people panic. They see this collapse of certainty as a sign that they need to try harder. So they double down. They hustle more. They add more credentials, more achievements, more proof that they're still on the right track. Here's the critical misunderstanding, though. The collapse of certainty isn't a crisis. It's a correction. Jung observed that the psyche has a built-in navigation system. It's always trying to guide you toward your highest expression. But when you're moving in the wrong direction, when you're living someone else's life, pursuing someone else's definition of success, performing someone else's version of who you should be, the psyche doesn't gently nudge you. It creates chaos. It makes you doubt. It makes you question. It makes the path you were on feel impossible to continue. Think of it like this. You've been walking north your entire life because someone told you that's where happiness was. You built a whole identity around being a north walker. You became known for it. You got good at it. Your true destination, though, is actually south. The closer you get to turning south, the more the north direction starts to feel wrong. Not because you're failing at being a north walker. Because your soul knows you're going the opposite way. This is the first sign. Asterisk. The shattering of false certainty. Most people have felt this. That moment when you're in a meeting or at a dinner party or sitting at your desk on a Tuesday morning and a voice inside says, "This isn't it. This isn't me. This has to change." And the moment you acknowledge that voice, the moment you stop pretending, you can never go back to the way things were. The certainty is gone. And now you're in free fall. The collapse of false certainty, though, is only the beginning. The second sign is far more disturbing. As the false certainty crumbles, something else wakes up inside you. Something that's been sleeping for a very long time. Jung called this the unlived life. The parts of yourself that you sacrificed for survival. The artist you buried to become practical. The rebel you silenced to stay accepted. The wanderer you locked away to build security. These parts don't vanish. They don't just accept their exile. They wait, they ferment, they gather power in the darkness. And when you're finally close enough to your breakthrough, when your soul is actually ready to express these parts, they stage an uprising. You'll recognize this moment by its unmistakable signature. Asterisk, irrational desire. Asterisk, suddenly you'll feel pulled toward things that make no logical sense. A fascination with a subject you never studied. an obsession with a creative practice you abandoned at 17, a longing for a completely different lifestyle that contradicts everything you've built. To the rational mind, this feels like a crisis. Why am I suddenly obsessed with painting when I have a mortgage? Why do I feel called to travel when my career is finally taking off? Why can't I shake this desire to reinvent myself completely? Most people interpret this as weakness, instability, a midlife crisis, a sign that they're losing their grip. Jung would tell you something different. He would say, asterisk, this is your soul finally speaking loud enough that you can't ignore it anymore. The unlived life isn't something to fear. It's something to integrate. You see, you didn't abandon these parts of yourself because they were wrong. You abandoned them because you had to, because survival required it, because fitting in required it, because the people you depended on needed you to be someone other than your full self. The cost of that survival, though, is that you've been living a fraction of your potential. You've been a two-dimensional version of a multi-dimensional self. The activation of the unlived life is the psyche's way of saying, asterisk, I'm ready to be whole now. Are you? Asterisk. This activation shows up differently for everyone. For some, it's an inexplicable pull toward a new creative path. You find yourself watching videos about pottery at 2 a.m. You're taking classes. You're suddenly surrounding yourself with artists. Nothing else makes sense, but this does. For others, it's a rebellion against the identity that served them. The people-pleaser becomes brutally honest. The strong provider admits they're exhausted. The perfect parent lets the dishes sit in the sink because they're writing poetry in their study. It can feel selfish. It can feel irresponsible. It can feel like you're betraying everyone who's counting on you to stay the same. That feeling of betrayal is the signal that you're doing it right. Because every expansion requires that you betray the smaller version of yourself. The unlived life isn't calling you toward chaos. It's calling you toward completion. Jung spent decades documenting this phenomenon. He found that people who answered this call, people who integrated their unlived selves instead of continuing to suppress them, reported a fundamental shift in their sense of aliveness. They stopped living a life. They started inhabiting a life. This is the second sign. Asterisk, the activation of the unlived self. We're only halfway through the transformation. The third sign is the most devastating. Once the false certainty has collapsed and the unlived life has awakened, your entire social structure begins to fail. People stop calling, invitations dry up, relationships that seemed solid suddenly feel shallow. Conversations that once energized you now drain you. The groups you belonged to no longer feel like home. This isn't coincidence. What's happening is a fundamental shift in your frequency. You're literally becoming a different person, and different people don't fit in the same rooms. Jung called this the death of the persona, the collapse of the mask you've been wearing. The persona is necessary. It's the part of you that negotiates with the world. It's professional, polished, appropriate. The persona, though, is not your real self. It's a tool, a function, a social skin. The problem is that most people confuse the tool with the self. After decades of wearing the mask, they forget it's a mask. They think the mask is their face. Then something changes. As you approach your best chapter, the mask becomes unbearable. It's suffocating. Every moment of performing feels like betrayal. Every time you play small to make someone else comfortable, you die a little inside. So the psyche does what it has to do. It kills the persona. And it does this by making you unable to perform anymore. You're in a meeting and the corporate jargon tastes like poison in your mouth. You're at a party and the small talk feels physically repulsive. You're with people you've known for a decade and you suddenly can't relate to anything they're saying. It's not that they changed. You changed. You're seeing clearly for the first time. And the people who are still trapped in the smaller version of reality suddenly look like they're living in a cage. This is the moment when the real abandonment happens. Not that you leave them, that you become incompatible with them. and they feel it. They sense that you're no longer one of them. Some will try to pull you back. Some will judge you for changing. Some will simply accept the distance. The pain of this third sign is extraordinary because it looks like loss. It feels like isolation. It seems like failure. What's actually happening, though, is liberation. You're shedding a collective identity. You're stepping out of the tribe. You're declaring through your very presence that you're no longer willing to be small. Jung observed that this phase is crucial because no significant psychological growth can occur while you're being constantly reflected back into your smaller self by your social circle. The mirrors have to break. Otherwise, you'd just keep looking at the distorted reflection and thinking that's all you are. The death of the persona looks like numbness to achievements that once thrilled you, inability to fake interest in people who bore your soul, a desperate need to withdraw from social obligation, a creeping sense of invisibility, friendships that suddenly feel like performances. This is the third sign, asterisk, the death of the persona. And it is absolutely necessary, because you cannot become your highest self while you're still imprisoned by your smallest self. Now we arrive at the threshold that most people never cross. The fourth sign is so paradoxical that it breaks the mind of anyone who doesn't understand what's actually happening. It's the moment when everything simultaneously falls apart and comes together. Jung called this the nigrido, the blackening, the alchemical stage where you're in the crucible. Every part of your old identity has been dismantled. Your certainty is gone. Your unlived self is awake. Your social mask is shattered. You're in the void, and the void has no instructions. This is where the real initiation happens. In this phase, you stop making sense to anyone on the outside. You might quit your job without a plan. You might leave a relationship that looks perfect to everyone else. You might relocate. You might start talking about things that sound insane to people who haven't gone through this. Your decisions stop being logical because logic was the framework of your old life. Now you're operating from something deeper, something that doesn't have words, something that feels like madness because it bypasses reason entirely. This is when you might feel a visceral no to things you used to want, a strange yes to things that terrify you, a loss of all external motivation. Achievement means nothing. A desire to be alone that borders on hermetic obsessive focus on one small thing, while the rest of your life falls away. Dreams that feel more real than waking life. Synchronicities that seem impossible. A sense that something is being built inside you, but you can't see what. Most people panic here. They think they're having a breakdown. Some seek therapy, which can help, but won't solve it. Some try to force themselves back to the old way, which always fails. Some self-medicate. Some just white-knuckle their way through, waiting for it to end, would tell you. Asterisk, this is not madness. This is the most sane thing that can happen to you. What's occurring is a complete rewiring of your internal value system. You're learning to operate not from external validation, but from internal truth. Not from shoulds, but from hell's yes. Not from safety, but from aliveness. This integration crisis, this beautiful, terrifying void, is where you're actually being rebuilt. Every great figure Jung studied went through this phase. Every person who ever became their truest self had to spend time in this void, where nothing made sense and the old tools didn't work, and the new tools hadn't manifested yet. The integration crisis is not a bug, it's the feature. It's where transformation actually happens. This is the fourth sign, Astras, the integration crisis. And if you're in it right now, it means you're not failing, you're becoming. We've arrived at the gate. You've moved through the collapse of false certainty. You've awakened your unlived life. You've dismantled your persona. You've survived the integration crisis. Now comes the crossing. The final sign is the one nobody tells you about, because it's impossible to describe until you've experienced it. It's the moment when you stop performing and start being, when you stop trying to become yourself and simply are yourself. when the space between who you thought you should be and who you actually are finally closes. Gentle music, almost sacred. This emergence doesn't happen all at once. It emerges in small moments first. A conversation where you say something true and wild, and the other person's face lights up. A choice you make that defies logic, but feels like coming home. A realization that for the first time in your life, you're not afraid of being too much. You're afraid of being too little. This is the inverse of everything you've been taught. You've spent your whole life trying to be acceptable, trying to fit, trying to be less of what might offend, threaten, or overwhelm others. At this gate, you realize, the world doesn't need another smaller version of you. The world is dying for your full expression, not in a grandiose way, in a real way. Your particular genius, your specific way of seeing, your rare combination of talents and wounds and wisdom. That's what the world is actually waiting for. Jung believed that every human is born with a specific destiny embedded in their psyche, not a destiny imposed from outside, an internal calling, a reason you're here. For most of your life, you've been running away from it, hiding from it, pretending it doesn't matter, the collapse of false certainty, the activation of the unlived life, the death of the persona, the integration crisis. These aren't punishments, they're invitations. They're the psyche's way of saying, asterisk, it's time. The world needs what only you can give. When you cross this final gate, everything changes. The synchronicities accelerate. The people who can see your real self start appearing. The opportunities that align with your truth start materializing. Not because you manifested them through willpower, but because you're finally broadcasting the right frequency. You stop being a question mark. You become an exclamation point. This is the fifth sign, asterisk, the emergence of the authentic self. I want to pause here, and if you're in one of these stages, I know it doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like destruction. You might feel terrified that you've made terrible choices, isolated from people you love, confused about what you actually want, exhausted from the internal conflict, doubtful that there's anything on the other side. All of that is normal. All of that is part of it. Here's what I need you to know. You're not lost. You're being found. The best chapter of your life doesn't arrive through accumulation. It arrives through subtraction, through letting go, through surrendering all the ways you thought you should be, so that you can finally be. Jung spent 60 years studying transformation. He worked with thousands of people in this process. Every single one who made it through the darkness came out on the other side saying the same thing. I didn't understand at the time, but that breakdown was actually a breakthrough. If this has resonated with you, if you felt that shiver of recognition, then you're being called not to figure it all out, not to have the perfect plan, not to understand every step, just to say yes to whatever is trying to be born through you. The best chapter of your life isn't something that's going to happen to you someday in the future. It's happening right now, in this moment. In your willingness to let the old version of yourself die, comment the word asterisk below if you're ready to cross this threshold. When you type that word, you're not just leaving a comment. You're making a declaration. You're signaling to your own psyche that you're committed to becoming whole. Share this with someone you know who's in their own crucible right now. Be the synchronicity they've been waiting for. Show them that what feels like falling apart is actually coming together. Your best chapter doesn't arrive through force. It arrives through surrender to what's already trying to emerge. And that emergence? It's not a future event. It's an inevitability.